always speak about how to unlock potential, how to maximize performance, but what are the real critical steps?
Welcome everyone. We are delighted today to be joined by Deniz Kayadelen, who is Head of Talent Management Consulting at EY, who's worked in various locations all around the world, but for the purposes of today is also a world champion in ice swimming alongside many other sporting achievements that we're going to go into. She's also the author of Out of Comfort Zone here. There'll be a link to that in the description to this video for anyone who wants to check that out. Joining myself and Deniz is Piers Martin, who is Head of Leadership and Academy Workforce Development at the Premier League. Piers is also working on a PhD at the University of Portsmouth. He's led and advised Olympic and Paralympic sports teams and coached individuals and businesses from startups through to established companies. We were also just discussing off camera that both of our guests today have swum the English Channel, among other things. So I'd love to hear more about that. For my part, I once swam 2 lengths of the Bournemouth Leisure Centre swimming pool back home in Reading. So that's as far as I get. I wouldn't get far in the English Channel. But maybe I can just throw it open to the two of you, maybe Deniz first, to just say a few words about what that was like swimming the English Channel. Cold, I imagine.
It's freezing cold and it's mentally challenging. So 3 years ago, I did a relay. I swam in total with 4 swimmers, and every hour we changed, and I was 1 hour in the water. And the cold water was always my fear zone, but now I decided to swim it solo, and my attempt is in July. So I'm really excited, but also a little bit anxious and nervous, and trying hard to train hours and hours, which is sometimes really mentally challenging besides the physical challenge.
And Piers, is very much the same for you, I imagine.
Yeah, actually, the hardest part was I started, so I did the same as Deniz. I did it as a relay, but I started, and so you have to swim to shore to wait for the boat to start you. And so you're sat there. You can't wear a wetsuit because of the rules of swimming the channel, and it was incredibly windy. And of course, you're now out of the water. When you get back in the water, it's strange because you feel a bit warm. But I agree with Deniz. It's the mental stimulation. It's keeping on focus, but also it's really hard from a resilience perspective when you're swimming backwards against the tide for an hour.
Yeah, wow. And it's really that resilience point that brings us on to our kind of main topic today. So what we want to discuss is what can business, particularly leadership and talent teams, take from the world of sport? What lessons can leadership and talent teams learn and apply in a business context? So maybe Deniz, if I can start with you, something that you say in your book, I'm just reading a quote here, the real fight begins after you feel pain and discomfort, and you can be a winner when you manage your pain and continue despite your inner blocks. You talk about how sport helps us to achieve a flow state and all these kinds of things as well. So from your perspective, how does the experience of taking part in sport help leaders to perform in a business context?
I think it helps really massively, because in sport you learn how to control your mind, how to control your body, and how to get the endurance. Because first you need to be powerful, you need to grow your muscles, your body performance, your mental performance. But it is not just about the speed, about the pace, but you need to keep your endurance. You need to be in the long run also showing the high performance. And that's exactly also important in the business world. So it's not just having one deliverable successful and make one client happy or one colleague or one boss, but it's a long run. And I think that's what we can really learn from sports, even if we get tired, even if we get overwhelmed, to structure ourselves, to have a clear mind and manage our energy. So it's about energy management, what we learn from sport.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess, Piers, just turning to you, you'll work with a lot of sports people in your role who have come into leadership positions, potentially without any kind of real leadership experience beforehand as well. What sort of qualities do you see in them that can help to make them good leaders?
As I've said to you before, it depends. It does depend on the role. It depends on the kind of thing that you're going into. There's also a bit of an aura that sports people have, that immediately we think you're going to be incredible at business because you're disciplined, you're resilient, you're, as Deniz says, you understand more about yourself. So the kind of things that I think set good leaders in the sport, in elite sport, aside, are people who are self-aware. They understand more about themselves, around the people that they work with. They understand more about the environment and the environmental change, and that adaptive leadership, the balance that can change based on whether you're in crisis or calm, is really important. Somebody who might well be one particular personality that can't adapt will be impacted by the environment. Sports people are very good at that, at adapting. The ones that are consistently meddling at world level or consistently winning at world level are the ones that can adapt, because they look for that continuous improvement in self and in others. I think what is incredible is when we get some brilliant people who have won Olympic medals and who have won World Cups, for example, in football. They then move into leadership roles which are more business orientated. They still have to learn how to be able to manage people within that context and within that setting. So they need to be able to adapt. But what sets them aside is that how they understand people, they understand themselves, and how they can adapt to that context.
Yeah, thank you. And Deniz, I guess come back to you again, that there's so many themes from what Piers just said about what the sort of skill set that sports people can bring to the table of adaptability, agility, self-awareness, which are real headline topics for leaders in talent development and leadership development at the moment. In your kind of in your business context, I suppose, as opposed to in the water, how do you see those skills coming through?
I think the most important or one key point is setting targets, having a clear vision, a clear target, and working towards those targets, right? So both in business and in sports, you need to always set small milestones before you reach the big goal. And you also need to have some regeneration time, pausing times, but also growth moments where you can grow and learn. So that means receiving feedback, learning from each other, and trying to be the best version of yourself. And I think that's both in common. So having a clear target, a clear goal, which is stretching, but which is also smart, like make it really countable. So how many hours you need to swim, or how many hours you need to work, what you need to eat, what you need to drink. Also at work, what you need to learn, what you need to do to win a proposal or to win a different client or a project. So you need to have those clear milestones and steps to reach this target. And I think that's what we can learn definitely also from sport. And this growth mindset mentality to adjust quickly, experiment quickly, learn quickly, getting feedback, and just adapting based on the feedback to make the most of our performance.
And Piers, is that again part of what you see from sports people that maybe, or people who do a lot of sport, that they're used to that idea of target setting, they're used to having those clear goals? Because I guess in sports sometimes the goals and the targets are more tangible.
Yeah, and feedback is instantaneous, right? If you win a game, you miss a shot, or you miss a tackle, or you touch the wall third or fourth even, and you miss out on an Olympic medal in 100 meters freestyle. Those are the kind of things that give you immediate feedback. I think a lot of the research that we've done and some of the things that we're doing have four key elements that are wrapped around how you plan. Understanding yourself and then putting that into some reflection is really important. And I think athletes tend to do that. I think they tend to have that continuous drive to be able to improve. And so setting macro, meso, micro targets as you go through is the same as a business. It's the same as a business leader would do. So they're well steeped in that. I think that just to reinforce some of the things that Deniz has said as well, there are four key areas that we see. The learning leader, someone who's curious and wants to be able to develop, and that's clearly something that comes out of being an athlete. The thinking leader is able to be able to think critically and challenge, but also is able to think creatively and to come up with solutions. An athlete does that. They come up with performance solutions to be able to get better and to and to win consistently over a period of time. Communicating leader, sometimes in a team setting, but as an individual sport, perhaps we see that less. Certainly within teams, being able to have your own identity is really important as a leader. So when I say it depends, it's how you change your leadership style, your approach more in terms of the people around you. And we speak around resilience, but it's also resilience and care for others. I suppose one of the derailers is if you're an individual athlete and you're, say, for example, a marathon runner, or you're a swimmer, you're swimming the channel, it's about you. You're putting yourself through something. You're not putting other people through something. You're prepared to do that. You're prepared for the pain, for the gain. But that care for others, that compassionate leadership, is something that perhaps needs change in your style if you've been in that individual athlete training and development for so long.
Yeah, so again, we're those sort of themes of resilience and agility, and you make the distinction with getting the best out of your teams, which again is something we're hearing all the time from leadership development teams, learning and development teams. Deniz, when you're talking to people in your own business or in other businesses about applying these ideas of sport, taking ideas from sports psychology and applying them in a business setting, do you find people are very receptive to those ideas? Is there any pushback? How do businesses feel about taking lessons from sport?
So 2 months ago, we organized a talent roundtable event in Zurich, and we had 20 clients on site and also digital. So there were different clients from different sectors, and they were really receptive about this topic because it was exactly how you can learn from sports psychology and unlock potential in business. And they were really receptive and open to those methodologies because it makes it tangible at the end. Because we always speak about how to unlock potential, how to maximize performance, but what are the real critical steps? And it's at the end, everyone understand much better that it is a whole system. We as a human being, we are a whole system. It's not just about what we studied, what kind of experience we have, or what kind of performance KPIs we have. It's really about our psychology, our mindset, our body and mind. And you can see it also with more key offerings in companies like well-being. So maybe 5 years ago, we didn't see any well-being offerings, but now it's get more and more important to maximize this performance. And I think that's also coming from the sports psychology. So how we can feel better, healthier to unlock our potential. And I think what Piers says is a really great point with the question, are you still an athlete when you are a leader? Or did you switch to be a coach? And I think that's one of the most challenging parts. If someone comes from a long year of being athlete, you learn to be sometimes hard to yourself. Even if you have pain, you go because you have the resilience. But then to switch as a coach and show this empathy and show this motivation and adjust your style and not be too hard to your people is also a key. And then this kind of well-being, psychological safety offerings really helps to a little bit soften the approach of being this hard athlete mind.
Yeah, so and Piers, you're obviously seeing that transition happen all the time of people going from being the individual athlete to being the coach, the team leader, the team manager, or the sort of director of business roles on that side of it as well. And it's something we hear on the business side as well, that people who are really good at being the data analyst, really good at being the business analyst, may not be the best leader of the team necessarily. How do you see that on the business side? Do you think there's more perhaps that businesses can take from how sport manages these things?
Yeah, I think the transition from playing to being a manager, leadership is something which is all around us, right? And it's in the eye of the beholder. So we can talk about leadership roles, and we can talk about people who are in leadership positions. We talk around Greta Thunberg now as a leader. We talk around Jacinda Ardern as a leader. Differences, but one's got a role and one's developed a role, for example. But I think when you look at stepping out of being an athlete into a leadership or a management role, that transition is really difficult sometimes, because we make this natural presumption that they'll be good at doing the both, especially within the sport. And actually there's some transition and there's some support. I have examples of people who have been incredible players, legends of football in the game, and they then move into leadership roles, management roles. And one of the things we have to do is to support them, and some of the things that they might need to adapt on. We talk about psychology, they're wrapped around sports psychology, but actually leadership psychology and business psychology is different. And one of the dangers is sometimes that we get people who adapt sports psychology principles rather than business psychology, organizational psychology principles. And actually the two of them should merge to be able to support that athlete. So I think it's that transition is really important, how we support that individual. And I go back to that self-awareness piece is really, really important. If they can understand themselves, other people, and they can understand the environment and they can adapt, and they're really curious about how they can adapt and they can perform, which most athletes are, they'll be really good at the job.
Yeah, and Piers, actually, that following on from that, I think it follows on quite nicely, and staying with you just for a moment. I saw a post that you did on LinkedIn a few months ago about football clubs in England missing their diversity targets. And you said perhaps it could help if we changed our perception so that we stopped viewing DEI as a checklist, as a thing to complete, and rather thought of it as an experience and a performance advantage. It struck me reading that there are businesses all over the world who could say almost the exact same thing. So this is not something that's unique to sport. And maybe, we talked a lot about the positive things that sport can bring, but there are shared problems as well, shared challenges.
Yeah, the thing that, and this comes from my own personal beliefs and observations in terms of fair recruitment, in terms of looking after equality for disabled people, for example, but understanding intersectionality, understanding the barriers that can be there for a number of people within sport and within business. But if we link this to sport, what we do really well is we look to identify individual differences. It's not about background. It's not necessarily around to bring in the right people because of an EDI strategy. EDI then becomes a checklist, whereas what we're really good at in terms of performance sport is identifying the individual differences that we need to get better, that we need to perform optimally. And if we start to change our mindset so that EDI isn't a checklist, so that EDI is something which is we're looking for as a performance gain, that's what sport does really well, but it just doesn't seem to do it particularly well in the boardroom. We're getting there with it, and I'm sure that we'll see many, many changes. But individual differences to me is the most important thing. If we're starting to look at Piers, Denise, you, Richard, we're looking at 3 individual people. We're looking at different backgrounds. We're looking at different styles and approaches. We're looking at different experiences. That's what makes us perform better, rather than starting to look at particular checklists. And I think that's what's putting people off, because they see it as something that somebody else does, rather than actually it's something which actually is core to our culture and it's core to our leadership.
And Denise, do you see that on the business side as well, that if you look at it as a performance advantage rather than being, as Piers was saying, like a checklist, that things like diversity, which are shared challenges between sport and business, get achieve much more success?
Absolutely. So I'm from my background by training a psychologist, and you can see there are different kind of personalities, as Piers says, right? So we have different kind of motivational factors. Some people are extroverted, some introverted, some people getting motivated by having a more pushy leader. Some are getting more motivated to having a more empathetic leader. And there, it's really important to understand those different key personality traits and our core values. And I think it's important to have those diversity in teams, because some are more creative minds, but maybe they are less structured. So you need both, right? You need a structured person, more critical person, but you need also a creative mind, open mind, to really have different kind of out of the box ideas. And I think that's crucial, the diversity, to win as a team. And we have it also in football or in other games, right? So some is more strong, so Pierre can say it better. Some are more strong at the front and some are more strong at the behind to protect the team. So I think you need to know which strengths you have, but also which development areas you have to compensate each other's development areas.
Richard, if I may, one of the things which is also really important is giving people an opportunity to be able to adapt. We talk around adaptive leadership and we talk around self-awareness, but if we've got to be really careful, especially in selection assessment and recruitment, we've got to be really careful, in my view, that when we are looking for somebody, we don't dismiss somebody who is able to adapt. If we class somebody as an extrovert, gregarious, as outgoing, somebody who is an introvert, who's high prudence, and perhaps is somebody that we would use our bias to select for particular roles, we've got to give those people the opportunity also to be able to show how they can adapt. I know some people who would be very high prudence and strong introverts who are excellent socially, presenting wise, who would be excellent in a number of different roles that our biases would pigeonhole. So we've also got to be really careful that when we take sports people out, we don't have this real biased view of what a sports person is, because sports people are individual, and a lot of them have individual strengths that are coming through, no different from anybody else.
And Deniz, you'd agree with that, I assume?
Yeah, definitely. And the self-awareness piece is again important, and to really be part of the team, to open to get feedback, reflect where I'm growing, where I have also potential, where I can be better, to really leverage this kind of diversity and growth journey.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I've got one more question that I want to ask before we finish up. A bit more of a fun one. And I prepped you both on this, so you've had a chance to think about it. But when you look at the world of maybe professional sport now, elite sport now, is there someone you see and who you think has maybe a set of qualities that would make them particularly suited to being a business leader, taking into account that obviously a wide diversity of skills and attributes is needed? But maybe Deniz, I'll start with you. Is there a name that comes to mind?
Maybe I will answer it with a question. Yeah. So who is the best leader? Do we have one best leader or are there multiple best leaders for different multiple employees' styles, needs, values, right? So that's why I think there is no one best leader and no one style which resonates with all the employees, with all the human beings in this world. That's why it depends, definitely.
Fair enough. And Piers, you echo that, I suppose?
You stole on my punchline, Denise, but yeah, it does depend. It's very easy for me working within football to choose somebody like Serena Wiegmann or Gareth Southgate, because they're seen as leaders, because they're successful in what they do, and they're brilliant at what they do in terms of people management, in terms of team management. So yeah, they would be good, but it depends. It depends on the business they're going into. They might not be quite as good as a startup, for example. If I take some examples of, would I compare a Federer or Nick Kyrgios or a Novak Djokovic or a Nadal or a Serena Williams or an Emma Raducanu? These are different personalities. Nick Kyrgios might be really good at an entrepreneurial creative because he's a disruptor, whereas somebody like a Novak Djokovic might be much better in something that's very technical. I'm going to choose Jodie Ounsley. You might have seen that Jodie Ounsley has now joined Gladiators, but Jodie is incredible. She's the president of UK Deaf Sport, where I chair. But because government doesn't fund Deaf Olympians as athletes, because it's not part of the Paralympics, it's a very difficult thing to be able to become a deaf athlete. You have no deaf icons. You have no deaf legends like the ones I've just mentioned before. Jodie shattered the mold. She's somebody who's playing able-bodied rugby for firstly for Sale and then for Exeter. She plays for England, but she's profoundly deaf. She'll take her cochlear implant off and immediately won't be able to hear anything at Twickenham. But why would she be a good business leader? Because she's insanely resilient, because she understands how she's raising awareness of being a deaf athlete, a profoundly deaf athlete with no support. She's broken through those barriers as a deaf woman. but more importantly, she's just very, very good at encouraging the next generation to be able to push through those barriers as well. So she's the kind of person that is, as I mentioned before, she has self-awareness, she adapts, and she's really, really good with people.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, we started with resilience, and we've circled our way back at the end there with a really fantastic example. So thank you, Piers, for sharing that, and thank you, Deniz, for your time as well. Before we get any final points before I finish up? We've covered it all. Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you both so much again for joining us, for sharing your experiences and your views, and for giving us so many examples to work with. And we look forward to seeing you later in the year. I think, Piers, we're seeing you in London. Deniz, are we
in Zurich?
In Zurich, we'll be seeing you again. Fantastic. So we look forward to seeing you both later in the year, and perhaps we can get you both together at some point as well, if the logistics work out. But yeah, thank you both so much.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.